Welcome everyone to this session on AAC. I hope you remember that acronym, Adaptation Action Coalition. It is the Adaptation Action Coalition meeting here. My name is Anidas Gupta. I'm the CEO and president of WRI. We are very, very privileged to be the secretariat of this AAC. And we have been absolutely fabulous work with all the partners you're going to meet today. It is kind of interesting right now. In Paris, there was an agreement to put half money of the fund for climate finance and adaptation and mitigation. That was a great signal. That was a good signal, but this year, the world has told us that we have to focus on adaptation. There's no country that hasn't had some kind of a weather-related event that's climate. So climate change is here, so we have to adapt. There will be, every country in the world would have to adapt. The question is how. How do we get to a more resilient world? And this discussion is about the how. How do we get there? What do we need to do together? We have a fantastic setup. We'll have two panels, one with a group of people who I'll introduce in a minute, who will tell us about how to take a whole systemic approach to adaptation. There will be people online and physically here. And then we'll have a panel of ministers committing to adaptation. So that is the setup we're going to have. But before I go on, I want to introduce two people who will welcome all of us to this fantastic session. First, Minister Trevelyan. Minister Trevelyan is currently serving as the Secretary of State of International Trade. I have to read it. There are many things she's doing. President of the Board of Trade. She served as the Secretary of State of International Development in 2020 and was the Minister for Development for Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy between January and September 2021. Secretary Trevelyan, please.
Thank you so very much. It's so lovely to see you all. Good evening, friends, colleagues. I'm delighted to welcome you all here this evening at what is still the beginning of COP26. I think day 2 still qualifies as the beginning. And to have the chance to speak a few words to you alongside my great friend, Minister Fouad. I'll begin with some thank yous, if I may, to the Adaptation Action Coalition Secretariat, WRI. Without you, we wouldn't have made the progress. And thank you for organising us all to be here this evening. And to the Resilience Hub, this wonderful hub, for sharing their space. And to the co-chairs and all the member states of the AAC for your commitment and indeed your ongoing efforts to delivering effective action on climate adaptation. I think this past year, the focus on adaptation has genuinely grown. That's the mission we set out on, and I think we are succeeding. Whilst I've been travelling this year, I've seen real change and progress being made across countries, civil society, and the private sector. And I think globally, our understanding of what adaptation is and where we should focus our efforts has genuinely improved. Through some AAC initiatives, we're starting to see and share examples of what works. And there is much more to be done, but I think we are starting to embed in everybody's thinking what this means in practical terms. And the Paris Agreement set out, of course, that increased ambition, mitigation, adaptation, finance and collaboration. And we needed to close that gap on adaptation. In order to protect communities and those natural habitats from destructive impacts of climate change, ensuring that the vulnerable countries are supported to develop and implement credible strategies, including in their adaptation communications and those national adaptation plans, which will feed through to the stocktake in 2023, where we get a really clear picture of the state of things. So the AAC is supporting and driving progress in these areas, but there is scope for us to do more. We need the developed countries to deliver on their commitment to mobilise 100 billion in climate finance every year, and countries need to improve the balance with mitigation finance, because the most vulnerable are in need for access to public and private sector finance in order to adapt. So we need to collaborate across governments, business and civil society, as we are doing this evening. And through this, I think we can try to ensure that during COP, the negotiations in the conference centre reflect the reality outside. Because during COP and our presidency, we want to see the AAC continue to grow and ensure that the urgency of closing that adaptation gap remains high on the global agenda. We want to capitalise on the convening power of the coalition to promote and share innovation, science and those solutions that will help us to achieve a climate-resilient world by 2030. In 2021, the AAC grew our membership to 40 countries. We launched work streams to support climate-resilient health, water and infrastructure, alongside many innovative locally led initiatives, sending a very strong message of commitment to do more. And as we move forwards, we need to continue to welcome new members. And we must identify and champion other sector-specific opportunities, shifting perhaps from a series of moments to build a movement to tackle those root causes of vulnerability. Adaptation is a core thread of COP. It's central to the finance, nature, science, and gender. And in particular, the Adaptation Loss and Damage Day, where we will hear from many diverse participants on Monday of next week. So I'm really looking forward to working with all of you to drive the growth and the positive impact that this coalition has already begun, and I know will be a critical part of our solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister, and the leadership UK has taken in this. Next, I want to invite Dr. Yasmin Fawd, the Minister of Environment for Arab Republic of Egypt. The Minister of Environment, she leads the transformational change in Egypt's environmental sector by creating a more business-oriented enabling environment. Dr. Fawd, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Actually, I'm the happiest one around in this room, and let me tell you why. In 2019, Egypt started that topic of adaptation with UK, and at that time, we were dreaming to come to COP26, and at that time we thought that COP26 would be on 2020, but because of the pandemic, we were given more time to work. We really are very honored and privileged and happy that we were able to put that adaptation issue on the top of the agenda of the COP26. This was a dream. This was something that we felt was very important for the successful of COP26, but very important and a priority for all the developing countries without any discrimination of those developing countries. But one important fact is that the moment that we started uplifting the level of adaptation, we wanted to have that political declaration, and we were able to have 100+ country and organization coming out from that political declaration. Now, as I heard from my friend Anna Marie, we have 40 countries that have joined that coalition. Now it's the time for action. But when we're talking about action, we want to have resilient cities. We want to have resilience community. We want to have local community that is able to adapt. And the only way to do that is to look at the vulnerable sectors within adaptation. That's why, together with the UK, we have selected the water and the health and the agriculture and the most three vulnerable sector. Health was overlooked. We cannot, after the pandemic, after the COVID-19, we still overlook the health sector. We cannot go to business as usual. And building back better would simply mean we need to adapt to all what is happening around us. And we need to make sure that the health sector is one of the most vulnerable sectors to the impact of climate change. And it hits hard all communities, all citizens, without differentiation between who's developed and who's developing. And from that perspective, I think that the launching of that event today is critical. And one important message that I would like to lead on that is that the only way that we can do adaptation is to listen, and listen carefully to the voices of the local community, believe it or not. Their traditional knowledge and the way they are adapting will amaze us and will definitely accelerate the actual adaptation action coalition that we've started, and looking forward to receiving you all once again with more continuation, more results on the ground, more stronger and resilient local community in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Thank you very much.
So we are looking forward to that, Minister Fawad. Minister Trevelyan said it's a coalition. And I just want to mention it is a coalition. The coalition was led by UK with Egypt, Bangladesh, Malawi, the Netherlands, St. Lucia, and United Nations, the founding members, plus Colombia, Fiji, Ghana, Japan, and the USA make up the steering committee. So as the minister said, it is going to grow, it is going to become a movement, and we hope we'll have a more resilient world going forward. We have a fantastic panel with following up this, and the question that we're going to discuss with the panel is the following. There's an absolute sea change needed to adaptation. Adaptation is not one thing. How do you actually do systemic change? But one of the things that has come up many times, and Minister Fawad, thank you for saying we should listen to people, the idea of locally led adaptation, which is closest to my heart. It is what is going to make the difference. So we're going to ask our panelists questions around that. Our first up is, all of you know, Achim Steiner. Achim Steiner is Mr. UNDP. Do we have Achim on the screen? So Achim Steiner, there he is. I can't see you, but I think, thank you for being here. I can turn around. Achim, thanks for being here. I think all of you know Achim. Achim began the UNDP administrator in 2017, and he has really worked tirelessly to champion sustainability, economic growth, and equality, and a big advocate for sustainable development goals. So Achim, the question I have for you is the following, that the UN has made supporting adaptation a priority. We are still seeing some persistent barriers on the ground. What can the UN system do to scale up adaptation to the ambition that we just heard from the ministers? Achim, over to you.
Andy, thank you very much, and it's good to be with you and to join you from afar. I will be in Glasgow next week, but let me go straight to what I think we all have already identified, and I think the NDCs have been a very good moment, a reality check for every country to try and reflect on where is the challenge in actually dealing with adaptation, not as an afterthought, but increasingly as an immediate urgency and in some cases emergency. I think the first part is we need to recognize that there is a major fiscal constraint here. Adaptation is essentially a new item in public finance, but also in the way that the economy needs to invest in simply protecting what it already has. This is particularly for developing countries extremely frustrating, because the more money you have to expend on where you are at, you do not have those resources to invest in where you want to get to. So there is a real fiscal dilemma here, and very hard choices are being forced on countries all over the world. So let's be very clear, finance, both in terms of domestic, but also international finance, particularly climate change finance, has so far been far behind where the actual need is. And we need to crack this. And this is part of the 100 billion discussion, but it goes even well beyond that. And I think that is where, beginning with the Secretary General, beginning with all the specialized agencies, funds and programs of the UN family, we have tried to approach this issue from the perspective of having to invest in adaptation in order to be able to cope with what has now become a reality. The second major lesson, I would say, is also through the NDCs and, UNDP, WRI, the NDC partnership. We have all learned a great deal together with the countries in the last 2 years, that trying to bring adaptation not simply as an add-on, but as an integral part of national development planning. We need the intersectoral, we need the sectoral approaches. Adaptation cannot be an add-on anymore in our time. Regrettably, it has become a design variable into looking at infrastructure, into managing land resources, for instance, hydrological resources. We have to rethink the way we actually deal with development planning approaches in order to be able to integrate, to use that term as its simplest summary. Thirdly, I think what is important and where we in, I think UNDP, to your question, have focused in particular is on the leaving no one behind. It is sometimes very easy to focus on the urban environment, to focus on the high capital infrastructure that exists in a country. But in fact, the greatest vulnerability in terms of survival is often located amongst those who perhaps are the least vocal or the least visible in an economic and political system. So development planning, sustainable development planning in a climate change era needs to take this notion of leaving no one behind extremely seriously, because that is where the greatest immediate impact is playing out. One reason why UNDP is a very strong supporter and focus particularly on LDCs, on SIDS in Africa, the Africa Adaptation Initiative, the Alliance of Small Island States, the chair of the LDC groups. These are interlocutors with whom we are very actively working on bringing adaptation, let's say, to the forefront of these agendas. And then finally, I think partnerships. The difficulty is if we only look to government, then essentially the frontier or the ceiling of what can be done on adaptation becomes the limitations of government and public finance. We do need to bring a whole of economy, a whole of society approach to bear on this. This is, the companies, the private sector that are investing in significant parts of tomorrow's infrastructure. How do we make adaptation a part of this design responsibility? Citizens who own houses in flood-prone areas, a phenomenon we have seen in many parts of the world. How do planning regulations provide the kind of incentives that allow individual citizen actions also to essentially incorporate an adaptation dimension to their future decisions? And that is basically, what we as UNDP, as part of a larger family of UN organizations, but many also in the civil society and the international community, are now homing in on. But let me end by simply reiterating the Secretary General's call also. If we are not able to scale up adaptation finance internationally, then none of these, particularly for those who are being left behind right now in this effort, is actually going to become feasible or on any scale relevant. And that is part of what UNDP's State of the Climate Ambition Report tried to both recognize in terms of the immediacy and urgency, but also to document where countries have actually taken steps. And that's the good news. Many countries are now beginning to do a great deal of what I just tried to describe in a couple of minutes. Back to you.
Hakeem, thank you very much, and thank you for all you're doing. I very much underline the whole society approach that you just talked about. Next up, we have Dr. Hala Said, the Minister of Planning Economic Development for Arab Republic of Egypt. Can we get Dr. Said on the... I was just about to say the tech is really working well. Honestly, I was just about to say that. Okay. We'll wait for a second. Let me introduce Dr. Al-Said. Dr. Al-Said is considered the first elected dean for the Faculty of Economics and Political Science in the Cairo University since October 2011. She also holds a position of assistant president of Cairo University in Scientific Research Affairs and External Relations since 2013. So we have an actual full-fledged expert joining us from Egypt. Yes?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to be with you today in this side event. And indeed, as you mentioned, adaptation is a top priority for us in Egypt, Africa, and the Arab region. The African continent, including Egypt, is contributing least to the global GHG emissions. At the same time, it is considered as a climate vulnerability, suffering impacts that exceed their adaptive capacity, from increasing temperature and rising sea level to abrupt changes in precipitation and extreme weather events. In addition, despite the fact that water was not mentioned in the Paris Agreement, it remains a top priority for Egypt, an integral part of combating climate change, which now has a growing effect on water security. Such cascading challenges pose significant risks to agriculture, to food security, and potentially reversing hard-aimed development gains. They are also considered the root causes of the climate-induced migration phenomenon. So, in response to your question, allow me to share with you a few examples of driving and mainstreaming climate change in our national planning process at the policy shaping level and at the institutional setup as follows. First, the government of Egypt, in its Sustainable Development Strategy 2030, is updating this strategy now, and this is due to we are responding to new and emerging challenges, including population growth, climate change, and water scarcity, while considering the regional and geopolitical challenges and also factoring in the impact of COVID-19. Secondly, in April 2021, Egypt launched its second phase of economic reform program, and this consists of a wide range of radical and well-targeted reforms to increase the resilience of the real economy. We're working on the supply side, so we're increasing the resilience of the real economy, which will aim at achieving a well-balanced green and inclusive growth. Third, the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, in partnership with my colleague, the Minister of Environment, we launched for the first time the guidelines for the environment sustainability criteria, aiming at greening our national budget and our national investment plan. And following this criteria, we are aiming that 30% of our nationally funded projects for this fiscal year 21-22 will be green projects, and of course we're targeting to reach 50% by the year 23-24. And as you know, Egypt was the first country in the MENA region to launch green bonds at $750 million in order to mobilize the resources for green projects. Also, the Egyptian private sector is ready to launch private green bonds through one of its private sector banks for a value between 120 to 200 million US dollars. The government is also launching very soon strategies related to the national climate change strategy, the national hydrogen strategy, national water strategy, and a set of economic incentives in order to promote the green transformation of the Egyptian private sector. Egypt is also implementing several projects to enhance its adaptive capacity to climate change, including the projects to protect the northern coast from sea level rise in partnership with the Green Climate Fund. Also the project of rehabilitating and cultivating 1.5 million faddans to better achieve food security and compensate for any land degradation and erosion in the Nile Delta, and the project to rehabilitate and revamp the national network of water canals in the context of modernizing the traditional irrigation methods and, of course, improve the efficiency of usage of our water resources that are scarce water resources. We're also improving management of water resources through different projects of reusing of water desalination, through using renewable energy, and the projects for wastewater treatment and reuse, and the projects for enhancing and modernizing the irrigation techniques to be more efficient.
Minister, that was quite a list. Congratulations. That's really inspiring. All the things you're doing, especially also encouraging the private sector. I'm going to go to Francesco Roca next. Francesco is the president of International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, IFRC. Francesco, the disaster risk reduction and humanitarian response community has so much in common with adaptation, right? You know, if you think about both things, they're very similar in some ways. How do you see these two communities coming together as we go forward with really large-scale thinking on, as you heard from others, mainstreaming adaptation?
But it is mandatory for us to work together, and this.
Maybe bring it closer. Yeah,
It's better now? Okay. It is mandatory for us to work together with all the sectors. Look, if we have a look to the number that I want to use only the extreme weather events since the pandemic started. We had more than 400 extreme weather events affecting the life of 140 million people. And who are these people? People at community level, the most exposed, in the most vulnerable countries. So when we talk about adaptation, we are talking about the life of community. And when we talk about the Red Cross, Red Crescent, which I represent here, we are talking about the frontliners in most of the cases. So this is why it's mandatory for us to work and to think in a different form. And the humanitarians cannot alone bear the weight of the consequences on climate change on our own shoulders. So this is why we have to expand the way we cooperate. We have to change the way we engage with all the sectors, not only with the states and governments, but also with the private sector that once was considered evil by the humanitarian sector. But now we understood that only together we can tackle this challenge. And also because when we talk about the community, and we are talking in the humanitarian sector about localization. Adaptation, it is about localization. It's about work at community level with the local institution. What we are doing so far. First, of course, we are changing the way we are working in the humanitarian sector. So not anymore in silos. We have to protect the few resources that we have at our disposal. And this is also another aspect, especially in the Interagency Standing Committee, we are doing a huge work to do this, to implement the way we work together and not anymore in silos. And secondly, we are working with the Adaptation Action Coalition with the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership, because for us, early action is proof that can save lives. So, and now we have a lot of mechanisms that can support the role of the humanitarians on the ground. And this is another aspect that must be underlined. How many lives we can save, triggering the right answer in the right moment and being prepared at community level. And finally, I would like also to close with a hope, because we have to consider, I'm very happy that finally, thanks to the efforts, of course, of the UK, the Egyptian and other countries that are putting at the center adaptation, and now finally this word is entering in the mind of the political leaders, and we do hope more commitment on this. But what we do want to see is that this money will reach the least developed countries. Because if you analyze the finance that has gone during the past years, the vast majority has gone in the middle income countries, and the least developed, so the most exposed and the least responsible to the consequences of the climate change are those who are paying the highest price. So we have to change the narrative, and we have to invest more in the most vulnerable communities and the least developed countries. Thank you.
Well said, Francisco. Even with more money, we have to make sure, as you said, every dollar goes the furthest, and the best use of the dollar would be actually making societies more resilient. That's much more effective in investment, so thank you for your points. I want to introduce Francis very next. Francis is the Executive Director, COP26 Climate Champions team. So as you can imagine, she's been very, very busy. She has really championed business, investor, city, state, and civil society in the climate action. Francis, thank you for all the things you've done. My question to you is this. You have been championing a whole society approach. You've been talking about this from the beginning and through Race to Zero, Race to Resilient. Tell us what gives you hope that we will truly reach the scale of adaptation that we need through this 2 weeks, and what you see happening.
Thank you, Annie, for the question. And I mean, first I should say that, you know, I work for the two champions, Gonzalo Munez and Nigel Topping, and Nigel really, really wanted to be here. He's in the plenary at the moment at this exact time. So I just wanted to let people know he asked me to step in, but he desperately wanted to be at this event because it is a really, really important part of our agenda. You know, asking about hope, this is quite a massive question, and I think, you know, I do have reasons to be hopeful, but it shouldn't be about hope. You know, this is something we have to do, and it has to be about action. And as Salim Huq said, director of ICCC AD and one of our champion ambassadors, so he said yesterday it's really a choice of adapt or die. And obviously, we don't really want the latter, so we have to adapt and we have to learn to be resilient. So that's why the champions launched the Race to Resilience campaign alongside the Race to Zero campaign to catalyze action by non-state actors. So it's not just a country conversation. We need to make it all of society. And we have this ambition to build the resilience of 4 billion people by 2030. We launched it in January with the current COP president, Alok Sharma, and the UNFCCC executive secretary, Patricia Espinosa. And it already has over 30 partners committed to take action. And we really champion the locally led leadership from these partners, you know, covering different areas, looking at resilience that's needed, whether it's from communities in coastal or riverine areas, urban communities, rural smallholder farmers. And it's had a very positive signal, and we expect throughout the next 2 weeks to have a wide range of outcomes, announcements, all from our partners on resilience. On Monday, on Resilience Day, Adaptation, Loss and Damage Day, the champions will be sharing significant progress that Race to Resilience has already made. Whilst this is embargoed, we already know that our partners, when they look at the action they've committed to take, the lives and livelihoods this will impact covers over 2 billion people. So this gives me more than hope that non-state actors are delivering increased action and investment, but we need to drive for increased action. Crucially, this has to be in partnership with states. We often talk in the Champions team about the ambition loop, the belief that when governments step up, it really gives a signal to the wider subnationals and the private sector to do more. And when they do more, it gives confidence for the governments to go even further themselves. And it's really important that we work together to keep driving this ambition loop for more action. This is why the Adaptation Action Coalition and the Race to Resilience need to continue to work closely together to drive the ambitions of states and non-state actors. We could not have either the AAC or the Race to Resilience without the leadership of Egypt and the UK and their coalition. The future's bright, but we need to work so that when we come to COP27, we're not talking about hope, but we're talking about what we've achieved and what more we can and must do. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances. And we're really looking forward to Monday. All those secret things we're going to hear about, I'm looking forward to. Our last panelist is very special, Alexandria Villasenor. Alexandria, if you wouldn't mind, I want to take a minute to introduce you. At age 13, Alexandria founded the U.S. Youth Climate Strike Movement, part of the Youth-led International Fridays for Future movement. At 16, which I think she's now 16, she set up a nonprofit Earth Uprising International. She already won the Rachel Carson Environment Justice Award, and she was in Politico's top 100 influential people, and she's just 16. Over to you, Alessandra.
Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I almost didn't make it here. There's a protest happening outside, and they weren't letting anyone in. But I waited. I was like, I have to get here. And so, first of all, I just want to say that I have really enjoyed listening to the work that everybody on this panel is doing. It's really important. And I also want to be honest with you all here. And I think that there is still so much more that we have to do in adaptation. And so to set the stage, I want to say how important adaptation is, especially to my generation. So every aspect of youth today, our life will be impacted the most by climate change. For example, from where we end up going to school, where we're going to live, there's a lot of young people even having conversations about whether or not they want to have children. And that is all because of climate change. And so it's so important that we start having more conversations about climate adaptation. And I really loved what Akeem was saying as well, saying that adaptation for too long has just been considered an add-on, but it needs to start being at the forefront. And so adaptation is a very important topic to me, and so I actually wrote down a couple of notes as well. And to start, we need to be much more clear and urgent with our language that we're using to talk about mitigation and adaptation. Because too often we're politely encouraging nations and states to do the right thing. The time for mitigation and adaptation to be optional has passed, though. And as Greta and the rest of the youth say, you can't negotiate with the laws of physics. Staying inside our planetary boundaries is not optional if humanity is to survive. And we're also not doing enough for developing nations. And as youth, we're increasingly concerned with the push for debt to deal with the climate burden, for developing nations to take on all of that debt as well. And so, as you know, this isn't a problem that developing nations have contributed to, but they are experiencing the worst effects of the climate crisis. And so this is a problem that was created by countries like mine, and who has historically emitted 25% of the greenhouse gases that are still in the atmosphere today. For wealthy nations to create a problem and then demand developing nations to take on debt to manage those problems is unconscionable. Wealthy nations must do more to take responsibility for the loss and damage that is occurring in the global south and developing worlds right now. And so there's still so much more we have to do in adaptation, but it's important that we start having these conversations right now, and especially at COP.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I hope members of all the wealthy nations took note of Alexandra. And thank you for being here and holding all of us accountable, our generation, that are we doing our bit. So I want to thank the whole panel. Please join me giving a big hand. They've been absolutely fantastic. Now we have to do a logistical maneuver. If you just would move, we can get the next panel in, and Rebecca's going to do this super fast. Thank you so much. So the next panel, we have different countries here, led by, we'll introduce them in a minute, with ministers and different government officials. They are here. You heard what needs to be done. You heard from our hosts what needs to be done. What we're going to hear from each one of them is their commitment of what they are going to do or they're already doing in adaptation. That's what we're trying to do. We're going to ask each one of you ministers to give very brief statements about what you're doing. Do we have everyone there yet? Okay. Why don't we get started with Honorable Minister Ramshay Prasad Yadav, Minister of Forest and Environment from Nepal. Minister, please tell us, what is Nepal planning to do?
Thank you. Respected Chair, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a matter of great pleasure and privilege for me to participate and share a few words at this event. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the Right Honorable Anne-Marie Trevelyan, UK Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth, and Dr. Yasmin Fouad, Egypt Minister of Environment, for inviting Nepal as a member of this coalition and also for joining the steering committee. I would also like to express my sincere thanks to the British Embassy, Kathmandu, for facilitation during our preparation for this COP26 amidst this difficult time of COVID-19 pandemic. Today we are here to learn and share about a clean, green and resilient environment. The initiative is admirable, relevant and proactive to beat the adverse impacts of climate change and to address the environmental concern globally and secure our common future. Respected Chair, Nepal is among the most vulnerable countries to climate change. The impact of climate change has been observed in various sectors like water, forestry, biodiversity, agriculture, and the cryosphere. Nepal is committed to acting on mitigating the known causes of climate change in line with the Paris Agreement, despite the country's negligible share in emissions. I would like to take this opportunity to share that the government of Nepal has taken various initiatives in devising appropriate policies, legal instruments, programs, institutional and financial arrangements toward climate resilience and adaptation. Nepal visualizes achieving socio-economic prosperity by establishing a climate resilient society and ecosystem. Nepal has formulated the National Adaptation Plan and long-term strategy on net zero emissions in 2021 and submitted to the UNFCCC. The long-term strategy aims to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2045. With the declaration of the UK government hosting COP26 in Glasgow in 2021, the government of Nepal proactively aims to engage more strategically and effectively at the international level to raise awareness of the needs and priorities of Nepal, especially the mountain agenda. With this, Nepal has a unique opportunity in leveraging and mainstreaming non-traditional and low-carbon financing. We will have been giving high priority for achieving sustainable development goals by 2030. In this regard, we urge UN environment development partners and members countries to focus efforts on building national capacity of least developed and developing member states. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Yadav. Next up, we have Japan. We have Mr. Shoda Yukata, the Vice Minister for Global Environment Affairs, Government of Japan. Mr. Yukata, please.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's my honor to make a speech on behalf of the Ministry of the Environment as one of the steering committee members of the AHC. We believe that the AHC's vision to accelerate global action on adaptation to achieve a climate resilient world is very important in today's world of climate crisis. Let me first share with you the recent progress made in Japan's adaptation policy. In Japan, the Climate Change Adaptation Act, an independent law for the promotion of adaptation, which is a rare thing in global terms, was established in 2018. Under the Act, we advanced climate change adaptation measures in collaboration with stakeholders. Also, a new national adaptation plan based on the latest scientific evidence was approved by the Cabinet on October 22nd. Based on the new plan, we submitted Japan's adaptation communication to the UNFCCC on October 26. Japan is also focusing on capacity building for policymakers around the world. That is what we would like to do with the AHC. In 2019, we launched AP-PLAT, the Asia Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Information Platform. This platform provides needed scientific knowledge, such as climate change risk information and web-based tools, as well as assists in the development of the skills needed to craft an appropriate adaptation policy. For example, Japan supports the independent state of Samoa and the federated state of Micronesia in developing climate risk information on storm surges and high tides that may affect their airports. Such information is expected to be used by the countries for disaster prevention planning and airport maintenance. On the AP-PLAT website, there are prediction maps of climate change impacts, as well as information on laws and national adaptation plans. These can be utilized by countries in order to reach the AHC's vision. In collaboration with the AHC, the Ministry of the Environment of Japan continues to support countries around the world by sharing scientific knowledge and the best practice on adaptation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We had planned to have Juan Nicolas Galarza. Juan, Nico he's actually the head of the negotiating team for Colombia. We just found out he's unable to get out of what he's doing right now. So we want to go to Henk Oving, Ambassador Henk Oving, if I can. He's going to be virtual. Henk Oving is the Special Envoy for International Water Affairs in Netherlands. Henk, can you hear us? There you are.
Yes, I can hear you, Ani.
Henk, over to you.
Very good. Can you hear me?
Can you hear us, Henk?
Yes,
All right.
I can hear you.
It's your turn. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first I'd like to thank the co-chairs of this event, Secretary of State for International Trade, Anna-Marie Trevelyan, good to see you, the Minister of Environment, Jasmine Fouad, for their ongoing efforts to drive adaptation action forward. And of course, for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of Minister Visser, who unfortunately is unable to attend this meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, the name says it all. Adaptation action, and action is what we need. Speeding up adaptation action is a matter of survival for the Netherlands, a densely populated country which lies largely below sea level, and for the Kingdom of the Netherlands too as a whole, which includes countries of Aruba, Curaçao, and Sint Maarten in the Caribbean, islands outside of Europe facing the impacts of climate change first and foremost, like so many small islands and states around the world. This is one of the reasons why we hosted the first ever international conference dedicated entirely to accelerating adaptation, the Climate Adaptation Summit this January, and why we remain committed as a leading member of the coalition to drive adaptation forward. We have learned by trial and error from our history of fighting the elements that a collaborative and comprehensive approach is essential. As the proverb says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you have to go together. We're keen to share our knowledge and expertise, to innovate together, and to learn from others about ways of making our national adaptation efforts stronger and the adaptation plans around the world best. One partnership I'm especially proud of is the Water as Leverage program in Asia. Its aim is to use an inclusive and comprehensive approach to develop innovative, bankable climate resilience projects, in this case for the cities of Chennai in India, Khulna in Bangladesh, and Semarang in Indonesia. And we're scaling up this effort across Asia and the world. Today, at the start of COP26, it is vital that we recognize the need to work together to boost adaptation at a global level by developing and implementing national adaptation plans. To help boost adaptation, it's essential to tackle obstacles along the way. And that means ensuring access to climate data for risk and vulnerability assessments, support capacity building to move adaptation plans forward, and enhance access to adaptation finance. The water work stream of climate adaptation is our tool to achieve this, including the water tracker, a diagnostic guide to help countries self-assess and enhance resiliency in their national planning. And the Water Adaptation Community, launched at the Climate Adaptation Summit I mentioned earlier. I also encourage partners to join the online platform State and Trends in Adaptation Knowledge Exchange, STAKE, which is hosted by the Global Center on Adaptation, to help countries connect, collaborate, and share knowledge and expertise. This flourishing community will meet at COP in the first ever COP pavilion dedicated to water, building water resiliency together. This is a hub where partners can join forces and go far, or actually say go further together. I'm proud to say that the Netherlands was part of the initiating coalition with the partners including, of course, the UK and Egypt, but also Tajikistan, Germany, the Stockholm International Water Institute, and the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. Water is the common element in most climate-related challenges, such as droughts, floods, extreme rainfall, and food security. Climate disasters are water-related disasters. During the past 20 years, floods and droughts alone have led over almost 200,000 deaths and affected over 3 billion people, causing almost $700 billion in economic damage. So water management is key to build resiliency. And that is why the Netherlands, together with Tajikistan, is honored to host the UN 2023 Water Conference, the second water conference in the history of the United Nations, the first since 1977. I look forward to our continued collaboration to ensure our efforts to have big impact, which we can present at this next step towards the Sustainable Development Goals. There's too much at stake to stay passive. Time is not on our side. We need global action to reduce emissions and stay within 1.5 and adapt at the same time to the changing climate, because that climate is changing now, not tomorrow. So I urge countries to join our coalition, join forces in our efforts to adapt together now. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you very much. Hank has been a very strong advocate for adaptation for a long time, Hank. We look forward to the water conference. I want to bring out Malawi next. We have Shamsa Najira. I hope I pronounced your name properly. Deputy Director for Forest and Environment Affairs. Ms. Najira, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, co-facilitator. I'm here representing the Minister of Forestry and Natural Resources, Madam Nancy Tembo, who was scheduled to be with us in this meeting, but she's just been called to attend to other duties by the head of state, who is also here, demonstrating how issues of adaptation and resilience are important to Malawi. We are happy to be part of this Adaptation Action Coalition. And the minister's message was very simple. We need to move from rhetorics to action. We've planned enough. We need to start implementing. As a country, we are ready to start upscaling the adaptation pilot, the interventions that we've piloted throughout the past years. We need to start upscaling them. We know what we need to do. We have strategies. We have a standalone climate change policy. We also have our NAPAs, National Adaptation Programs of Action. We have a charcoal strategy, landscape restoration strategy. We have all these policies and strategies in place where we've prioritized our adaptation and mitigation interventions that we know we need to start implementing. All we need is adaptation finance. So our message is to say, let's bring the 100 billion on the table. Least developed countries like Malawi want that money to start implementing our priorities. Akim from UNDP also mentioned about scaling up adaptation. We've piloted these interventions. We moved beyond business as usual approaches and came up with pilot interventions that are working for Malawi. But we don't have the financing to upscale those initiatives in order to make impact and build resilience for our communities and ecosystems. So we need that adaptation finance. We are ready to use nature-based solutions. We need technological solutions in terms of technical assistance to come up with these technological solutions and innovative approaches to upscale these that we've piloted. And most importantly, we also need to start investing in rehabilitation of our degraded environment. Because as an LDC, our environment has been highly degraded. And we are facing the magnitude of the impacts of climate change because of these degraded ecosystems. So investing in these degraded environments will render our ecosystems and communities more resilient to these climate impacts. In terms of coordinated approaches, we have already started putting together a whole of society approaches. We've recently established a network on women on climate change. We have a civil society network on climate change. The youth have got also their own network. The academia, there's a special network for them to undertake research in climate change. So we are putting all this together, even the local communities, for them to have a say in what we want to do as a country. And we need to take advantage of this COVID-19 pandemic so that when we are building back, we need to build back better using green recovery approaches so that by the end of the day, we render our least developed countries more resilient and adapted to issues of climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I think as we wrap up this panel, I would like to go to the United States. You heard President Biden. This is a very important topic for President Biden. We luckily have Christina Chan here. Christina Chan is a special presidential envoy for climate. She's been central to a lot of thinking in the government on thinking about adaptation. Christina.
Thank you so much, Ani. It's a pleasure to be here. Secretary Kerry gives his regrets. He's in another meeting as well. But I wanted to join this really important event just to speak a little bit more about the announcement that President Biden made yesterday. I'm not sure if you caught it. He announced yesterday his emergency plan for adaptation and resilience, PREPARE, and a commitment to work with Congress to provide $3 billion annually in adaptation finance by 2024. This would be the United States government's largest ever effort on adaptation and resilience. And our hope is that it responds to many, many of the priorities that other countries and panelists have highlighted before me. I want to just share a little bit about what PREPARE is. It is an overarching framework for the U.S. government. It brings in all of our federal agencies, from USAID to State Department, NOAA, FEMA, Department of Treasury, our DFC as well, and countless other agencies. There are 3 components to PREPARE. The first is preparing knowledge, and we've heard it from several panelists today, the importance of information and knowledge. Knowledge is power. We need to get information into the hands of people in order to reach the targets that Race for Resilience has set. We need to understand what works and what doesn't. Knowledge just isn't about getting climate information into the hands of people, but also what works and what doesn't, and to get better at monitoring, evaluation, and learning. We need to build also the capacity of the next generation of adaptation professionals. We need to reach them when they're in school, when they're 16, so that by the time they're in government positions or they're leading companies, they know from the very get-go that climate risk needs to be part and parcel of their daily functions. So that's the knowledge piece. The second is preparing programs and plans. 2 parts of this. One is we need to get adaptation out of the environment silo. We need to stop talking just to ourselves about the importance of adaptation. Our mayors need to understand it. Our agriculture ministers need to understand it. Our extension agents need to be capacitated to do this. So that's one. The second is what's come up several times during this session, the importance of locally led adaptation. It is about getting resources down to local people, but it's also about subsidiarity in terms of decision making. The decisions need to be locally led as well, not just the funding reaching those levels. Finally, preparing resources. This is absolutely key. It's about mobilizing resources, both public and private capital, for adaptation, as well as increasing access to those resources. So those would be the 3 components of PREPARE. We're really excited about this effort, and I hope that you will be partners with us to help develop the implementation details as we roll it out over the coming months. Thank you.
Christina, thank you. And it's such a welcome initiative. I heard President Biden say exactly what he said about the whole government approach, that we need to take adaptation out of silos and bring it to every part of government. So thank you for all you're doing there. Thank you for this fantastic panel. Don't get up for a second. As we wrap this up, I really want to bring 2 of our leaders here. Ambassador Ayman, please come up here. Ambassador Ayman is the Deputy Director of Environment and Sustainable Development Department in the Egypt Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Vijay, please come up here. Vijay Rangarathan is the Director General for Americas and Overseas Territories and Nuclear Government, FCDO, here. So, Ambassador, I will give you both 2 minutes to tell the panel as we wrap up what do we need to do next.
Well, first of all, thank you, Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, for your interventions. It was real and clear message for the outside world about what we are doing here in the Alliance. As the 2 ministers had actually mentioned in the beginning of this event, that yes, the coalition is getting bigger and bigger. It's getting bigger not only because of the work of the Egypt and UK in promoting it, but it's getting bigger because adaptation is becoming necessary. The UNEP report identifying the gaps of adaptation give us like a red alert that we have to be aware of the consequences of not fulfilling the gaps of the national adaptation plans that we are submitting in our NDCs. The gap is becoming actually bigger and bigger by time, and this something should be addressed. Mitigation and adaptation should be actually on the same footage and should be treated as equal. The message of the United Nations Secretary General was quite clear, 50-50. Yes, we need 50-50 because otherwise things will not going to work out in the way that we would like to see. It's the lives of our people that we are fighting for. It is the food security that we are looking to enable for our communities. It's the community itself that we would like to defend during this time that we are trying to mitigate and put down emissions. So both should be actually treated as equal. I know that I don't want to keep you here hostage. I know that we would like to finish as soon as possible. So I give now the floor to my colleague, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. So I'm going to just try and summarize what's been a really rich discussion, but this will be brief. And I want to bring out just a couple of points because, like many of you, I've been taking notes as to a lot of the great ideas that have come. I think the first is there are a lot of good examples, and many ministers have set those out as to what works. But what works is really what matters here. The second is sharing those through the AAC, and that is the core of the AAC, and then doing them at scale. And that links to the point our colleague from Malawi made, which is finance, which is necessary, huge issue, really welcome the US joining the club on adaptation. And I think Francis teased us with some of the announcements coming on Monday, which I hope will go even further on that. Next, partnership, a whole of society approach was mentioned. And focusing on some of the absolutely key areas. Water, Henk mentioned that. Henk and I have been working on water issues for a while. I'd encourage you to visit the Water Pavilion, the first at a COP. We were doing an event there yesterday. It is absolutely crucial, not just for all the reasons you know as well as I do, but also the link to health, which is, of course, the second big area. That health, I think, if we ever needed a kick to make us take it seriously, I think a pandemic probably is that. But making health systems resilient and decarbonizing them is absolutely crucial. Infrastructure, I won't say any more of. Many of you have covered fantastic projects going on. Then finally, three themes. I think we've heard very strongly from all the speakers the importance of it being locally led. Christina, I like your word subsidiarity, usually used in a extremely legal context, but that sense of it being locally led, locally owned, locally governed, I think is crucial. The second is the metric. I have to say, this is a more personal reflection. I think adaptation has suffered compared to mitigation because you can't put a clear number on it. We put a clear number on mitigation. It's 1.5. It's net zero. Nice and clear. Very hard to yet see the clear number on adaptation that actually enthuses people. I think I was very taken by what Akim said and Alexandria about saving lives, saving livelihoods. I think those are really interesting. And Francisco, I think, picked on that exactly about the importance. Finally, that issue coming up about making adaptation retail. Akim raised it first. How do we make it so that when I'm, I don't know, putting a roof on my house, building a side of a road, taking my small business and working out the size of the gutter I put on my storage area, how do I know that the adaptation challenge I will have? And I think if anything, this COP has shown us we have to adapt because climate change is already with us and going to get worse. But how do I know what to do? And I think that challenge of the data and making adaptation really retail in a way that mitigation already is will very much help with what my colleague said about putting it on the same platform. And the final thing is just to say, I hope we have succeeded as part of the COP presidency in putting adaptation very high on the agenda, and witness this event and many others. Adaptation Loss and Damage Day will be crucial. I think that this is building a coalition going into COP27. And I will just end with one word, which I think, as Francesco put it beautifully, adaptation is now mandatory. And that, I think, is the word I'd leave you with as we move on. Thank you so much, Anil.
Just one thing I just forgot. One thing I just forgot, just to complement the word here of my colleague. The coalition is not meant to make resource mobilization. We're not trying to collect money from donors. We are not sponsoring any type of programs. But actually what the coalition is doing here is identifying the global goal on adaptation. What exactly we would like to have. And this is a complementary process to the UNFCCC itself. If we don't have this to be in the context of the UNFCCC itself and the COP, so definitely we would lose a lot. And I think that by next year, by COP27 in Egypt, and what comes beyond in COP28 during the global stocktake, definitely the coalition will do a great job in identifying the global goal on adaptation. Thank you so much. It's back to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you, Vijay. Thank you all for joining. I think two things are clear in Egypt. In COP27, we will discuss adaptation as much as we discuss mitigation, right? That's one little indicator of success, I hope. And the second, you heard from Vijay, it's a partnership. It's a coalition that we will do together. So the Adaptation Action Coalition stands ready to help, support in any way, any country that is trying to make bold action adaptation. So thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. Thank you for being here. Vijay, Ambassador Ayman, thank you. Thanks for being here. Have a great evening.